welcome to the show my good friend, Chris Brown, and he is the founder of RJ Birch Search Group. We met through the Entrepreneurs Organization in Dallas. We were both past presidents and became friends there. And then actually we realized we were acquaintances as kids because we grew up and spent time. I grew up my whole life in Arlington, Virginia, but he spent some time there. And so we knew each other there. And then he was back there later for a few years while I was there. And I don't know if we overlapped that time, but it was a crazy thing. We belonged to the same country club, and then we met down here, a couple of decades later. So hello, Chris.
How's it going, Henry? It has been a long time when you start thinking about it, and we're all feeling a little bit older these days, maybe even around the midsection a little bit. But you look back at those days, those were 45 years ago that you and I were terrorizing Washington Golf and Country Club back in Arlington, Virginia. 45 years. It's crazy.
That is something. And I had most of my family at my parents' level and grandparents' level, pretty much all of it actually, that was involved in one way or another. You were there partly because your family was involved in government. That's quite a story. Why don't you share a little bit about that?
Oh man, Henry, I tell you, I've always had some sort of ties to Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, up until I moved down here to Texas back in 1995. But my entire life as a kid, from the day I was born, my granddad was a member of Congress. My mother worked up there as a lobbyist for a number of years. And I loved it. I mean, especially because it was very easy for me to make that decision after college to go back up to Washington, D.C., where I was from 92 to 95. And I did some internships in the summer, which it was just a blast. It was so much fun being up there, learned a lot. But then it didn't take a whole heck of a long time to realize I know what I don't want to do for very long. So make your mark, learn what you need to learn, and kind of move on to bigger and better things. And that's when
Well,
we
this
moved down
was
to Texas.
always modest about it, but Congressman Jim Wright was a long-term congressman from Fort Worth. I was just looking up how many years he was congressman for 55, 34 years, and he was the 48th Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. So that is a big deal.
Yep.
So you got some interesting experience in the political world through both your mom, but others in your family, and of course your grandfather.
Yep,
Uh,
sure do. Sure do. And he was faithful to the opportunity because he played football and all the other sports in high school, and he ended up busting up his knee pretty good. And one of his teachers had come to him and says, "Hey, Jim, you're not playing football this year. Why don't you come out and join the debate team?" And he was like, "Debate team? Okay." Just jumped on it because he was offered the opportunity, and the teacher at the time thought he was going to be doing very well. And it could have been the same guy who was at the football coach. I don't really, know those details. But so he went and did that, and the rest is history. And it was like a duck to water. And he became a very, very, very young mayor out there at Weatherford. I think he was 25 years old, 26 years old, or something like that. And maybe he was a couple years older, but then that got into his blood, and he just ran with it and made it a career for himself. Very successful career for himself.
well, and your first job was interesting because it was a non-political job. I understand you did get that through some people that you knew through your family, but you actually worked in the House of Representatives, kind of on the business side. Because you went into
Yep.
business after that. Interesting to work for the U.S. House of Representatives, basically helping them with business.
I know. Seems like an oxymoron, doesn't it? You're like going, the federal government and business. Where people might be scratching their head for that.
And then that must have been a few fun years. And then I guess what took you to staffing? So your first job after that was staffing. Your current business is staffing. There's lots of different names for staffing. I mean,
Yep.
old names for headhunters. You probably know them all, but what interests you in that? Obviously, you're very good with people. You're a relationship person. That's got to be part of it. But there must have been something that intrigued you about that originally, and then you stuck with it,
I
built on
did.
it.
Henry, and it was one of those things where, funny story is my wife and I came down to Texas back in the beginning of 1995. We were down here for a wedding. Back then it was time for us to leave Washington, D.C. by choice. We wanted to get out of there. We wanted to, go someplace else and learn something new. And what we did is we had, subscribed to the local newspapers from Tampa, DFW, Austin, and Phoenix. We were going through the wanted ads, and so that time we were faxing resumes, and it was just coincidental that we were coming to Dallas for a wedding, and so we had interviews set up for Thursday and Friday of that long weekend, and then I think Tuesday, following that weekend. And by the time we got on the flights on Wednesday, we both had offers. We're like, well, guess this was pretty easy. So it was fly back to DC, pack up, put in our 2 weeks notice, and bring it on down here. And so I ended up working for a company that was it was a commodity sell, and I learned a lot from that too, because it was trying to take a commodity sell and turn it into a features and benefits and why they needed specific equipment. And this was for Pitney Bowes, and they were selling photocopiers at the time. And so, but spent a little bit of time there, did very well for those guys. But again, once again, it was one of those things where it was a learning opportunity. Being 24, 25 years old, someone had reached out to me, a guy that I knew, said the exact same thing. He says, Chris, you never met a stranger. You seem to know a lot of people. You're the ringleader for all the socialites. You guys are always going out and having fun and stuff. I said, you probably would take a look at this, and you might do very well with it. And so I did, went through an interview process, got an offer. And again, it was just one of those things where it just came. It's never really easy because it's a lot of hard work. But the biggest fears that most people had about reaching out to executives or other individuals to potentially, have a story to enhance their careers in one way or another. I really enjoyed that. And I went back to, some of the things that I was doing up on Capitol Hill. I was that liaison between the members' offices and the committees, and the vendors, the people that were selling all the office equipment and such. And so it was kind of back to what I'd already learned for the 2 or 3 years, since I'd been out of college. But it was selling a different product. And this wasn't something that was going to be a tangible product. I was selling a service, number one. But then, my product was really people and their services and their capabilities of what they could do. So it was a little bit more difficult, and it took the learning curve is a little bit steep on that. But once you get to it, if it's something that you like and something that you can do well, you can really make a very good career out of it. And that's just this year's number. I think it's number 29 or 30 for me. So it's treating me fairly well.
And you were pretty steady. I mean, you had a couple jobs, but not short-term jobs, like 6 months or something. And then you founded RJ Byrd in 2007.
Mhm.
So how did that come about? Because that's a big step, going out on your own, found your own company, have it to this day.
Yep.
Uh,
Well, the company where I was a non-equity partner was actually sold. The partners sold the company to a much larger organization. And so with that, it was the investment in the expansion was not going to include my division. I had started the division up from scratch, and it was the technology division for recruiting and staffing. And so once that happened, we agreed to, kind of part ways at that point, and I hung my own shingle. And so it was fun, it was hard. And I tell you, people that go into business for the first time have a pretty good idea. They either have something very unique or something brand new to the market that, is going to change the market or whatever it is that they're selling to people, or someone is taking an old idea and they believe that they can do it better, more efficient, more effective, or whatever it is that they've got in their mind. And so that was certainly the case for me. And so one of the things I noticed was there's a lot of work to be done. And it seems like it's easy for everybody else thinking outside the box and looking in and saying, oh yeah, I could do this. But when you're actually, your income depends on it, your compliance, it depends on it, your reputation depends on it, and everything else that you got to do for labor laws and such. It's important and it's big, and it was very difficult, but we've enjoyed ourselves. And you think about this, we started in 2007, and in 2008 and 9, market crashes, and so we made it through there, limped, because again, we wasn't a whole heck of a lot. I think we might have had 4 or 5, maybe even 6 people working for us at the time. But since Labor Day, 2009, up until 18 months ago, Labor Day 2023, we saw and benefited from the greatest employment market the world has ever seen. And thank God we're in DFW, because we didn't, we don't have the peaks that, the coasts do, but we also don't have the troughs. So it's just as diversified as we are with our industries. It worked out real well. So no regrets. It's all been a good ride.
what do you like best about it? I was looking at a little note from the founder. I know that on your website, which you can look up, everyone can look up, rjbird.com. You talk about quality, not quantity.
Mhm.
So earlier you talked about more commodity, and this is more about quality. Has that been your mission,
Yep.
or one of the things that you said, maybe try to take idea and do better than some
Yep.
of the others? Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really what we didn't want to be everything to everybody. We wanted to be very selective with the size of the companies that we were working for, kind of industry agnostic. But what we really wanted to be able to do, Henry, is when somebody comes to us, we're talking to the decision maker. because that's who's going to be impacted by our services, and whether or not we succeed or fail. Sometimes you never even see who the person is that's actually buying your services. It goes through, a recruiting team or HR or some other facilitator that actually is helping out, for the person that is actually going to be hiring for this role. And so by sticking with the small to medium-sized businesses, by and large, we had most of our successes was dealing directly with the executives themselves, mid to senior management. And so that's what we wanted to do. And we made a huge impact in, taking it to market and taking this idea to market. It was still recruiting, but the great thing about it was we had something fresh, something different, something that nobody else out there was doing. And that idea was there was again, this is back in 2007, all the way up to, the craziness of the pandemic. But there was nobody really out there that was specializing in a specific compensation segment. And what we did is most of our stuff was $100,000 to $250,000. Back then, that was real money. Today, rarely people are being blinking an eye at that. But back in the day, if you think about this, it was too small that the big retained firms didn't want to mess with it at all. In fact, but they knew how much business was there and how important it was. And that's why a lot of the big boys started up what I refer to as their JV crew. And that's what, what they were doing was focusing in on that below $500,000 compensation. Well, they were selling nationally, they were competing against each other. And so when we showed up, it didn't matter if it was a CHRO, if it was a CFO, CEO, CEO, any C level that we sat down with and said, look, here's what we do and here's why we do it. And I said, you're going to get the service and you're going to get the delivery of a retained firm at the speed and flexibility of a local staffing firm, recruiting firm, whatever they're referring to it as. And people are like, well, how are you going to do that? And so it really started conversations that, again, nobody else was having. And so we were trailblazers as far as that's concerned. And so it was fresh, it was new, it was different. And the clients loved it because now they didn't have to go get a retained firm to go do, someone that was controller level or CFO level or even a CIO, CTO. They could come to us and they could trust us, because that was the one thing that was extremely important to me is we have to be trusted, and it takes a long time to be able to build that trust and reputation in just a split second. You screw something up one time, you say something that isn't true, or you've kind of shoved a square peg into a round hole, so to speak, and it just doesn't work out, and no one believes you that, from that point going forward. So it was at all costs that we were going to be very ethical and honest in everything that we ever did.
So walk through for someone that hasn't been through this before, if they wanted to get help. There's really two sides of this, but more than that. But put simply, if you're someone that wants to get help finding a job, and either a recruiting firm reaches out to you, or you want to reach out to a recruiting firm, what would that look like? And then on the contrary side, I think you explained, yeah, well, you obviously, how do you find those people? So you go with a company, because I have worked with staffing companies, and they come and they say, well, what's the range? And then they tell you what they think the range is, and there's some back and forth because they have market expertise, and what's the experience level, what's the job description, what would make them want to come work for you as opposed to somewhere else, all those kind of questions.
Sure.
But I really don't know much about, I guess, okay, how do you go find those people? And I imagine it's changed over the years. We didn't have all the internet where people do a lot of posting online. So there's probably some history to that. But like, if you're going to give us a company advice or a prospective employee that wants to find a job advice, what would you tell them?
Well, it's multifaceted too, because there's so many recruiting firms, here in DFW, and then everybody outside of DFW wants to do business inside DFW. So a lot of times, some of the basics that I would recommend to somebody is look at a company and find out, are they based here? Is the corporate headquarters here, or is this a satellite division? Because believe it or not, sometimes it makes a huge difference. Because if it's the principal, me, and the buck stops with me, they always know that I'm a phone call away, an email away, a text away. So if something were to go awry, which it does happen, it's certainly not the practice, but every once in a while something's gonna, rear its ugly head, and it makes
Anything in life, yeah.
yeah.
Driving around the corner, go to the grocery store, and something can go awry.
Yep.
Get a flat
Yep.
tire.
Yep, that's exactly right. So you take that into consideration. That's just one basic operation. But the other thing too is you're looking at the opportunities that are out there to post it. And so you're going to be able to pick up a lot. Anybody's going to be able to pick up a lot when you're having a conversation with you, me, or anybody else that's going to be sitting around us. Is are you getting something that you feel as though you're being sold something, or is the person trying to go through the details but can't really answer a lot of the details and the granular items? Because Henry, the easy parts of this. Hey, what's the salary range? Hey, where are you guys located? Do you have to show up to work? Or are you working remotely? Is there parking? Is there, what's the next step up, or how big's the team? All those things are easy. They're very basic and they're very logical. But if you put yourself in a situation and you came to me and you're looking to hire somebody, the intangibles are really what's going to make you very proud and very successful in this industry. And so what I mean by that is it's easy to match up acronyms. It's easy to match up an education or certification or skills on a resume to that of a job description. Those are the easy parts. But when you're really looking for a cultural fit or even how do I say this, a competency, okay, not a competency in the sense that what has the individual accomplished, since he or she has been out of school for 5 years. What I'm talking about is if you get some forethought to this, and I ask you the question, hey, Henry, okay, talk to me about this role. Why is it open? And then we start going into great detail about why is it that you even need to hire this person or want to hire this person. But when I ask the question and I go, okay, let's fast forward this. We're successful with this place when we find what you're looking for. And you're sitting down doing a year in review with this individual. What has that individual accomplished for you? Okay, what are the bare essentials and the expectations that you're going to have? And what has this person done at that point that's really just blown the socks off you, that really has gone beyond the call of duty and what your expectations were? So when you start thinking about those things, and then now you start talking about, wow, nobody's ever asked me that question before. And that's usually what the response is. But it also starts thinking about a wish list. I said, are you just looking for someone who has a degree? Are you just looking for someone who has a certain certification and a clean resume who can walk and chew gum at the same time, and somebody who's going to show up to work whenever they're supposed to be showing up to work? Again, before the pandemic, it was easy, Monday through Friday. After the pandemic, not so much, because now people are working hybrid, some are remote, and some people are being brought back. But those are some of the differentiators that we've trained on exhaustively to make sure that it's shut. Everybody knows the easy questions and the easy answers. Go beyond that and be able to find out what really is going to work. And then when you're qualifying and you're talking to other candidates for particular positions, you're going to be able to guide the individual and start talking about what if and behavioral type of interviews to find out whether or not they're even going to survive, number one, or thrive in a fast-paced environment. And if they're looking for someone to reinvent the wheel, there's a lot of those positions out there too, and those are role players, and that's fine. There's a lot of those, but really what you're looking for is what's going to make a difference and what's on your wish list.
So, was there one big change in the industry 10, 15 years ago 20 years ago, or that you were able to overcome? Because there's been significant changes, and I'm sure you had to do some adjustment along the way.
There's
Uh,
been some evolution, and I've been, my answer to that question is very, very similar. Every time there's a new technology, the latest and greatest, obviously, everybody knows about is going to be AI. But prior to that, it was going to be, job boards. And prior to that, it was going to be job boards with crawlers and then, specifics, you name it, doesn't matter what it is. But every single new technology for the last 25 to 30 years is going to put the recruiting business out of business. And it never happens. It just doesn't, it can't. I don't care how good AI is. It can identify a
yeah,
Henry Harrison or a Chris Brown. But at the end of the day, if the individual is going to reach out to us and we don't like the conversation, we don't like how they're pitching it, what the company culture is, or again, whatever the items are that we just don't like them saying, then it matters. Nothing ever happens and no deal's ever closed without, unless you're buying gas. That's an easy deal to be closed without any human interaction. But it's all about conversations and your ability to influence. Your definition of leadership. It's nothing other than the ability to influence. Well, if someone's going to reach out and representing company XYZ and is trying to woo me into coming to work for XYZ, it better be something pretty spectacular, very intriguing, or go, interesting, tell me more. And I better like the other individual on the phone, because if they're just reading off a piece of paper or they sound unintelligent or really can't answer those hard to answer questions, it's not going to go anywhere beyond that. It really and truly isn't. And that's just what our experience has been. So every time there's been a new technology, it just opens the door for opportunities, because people start relying on that technology and they realize this isn't exactly what we thought it was going to be or what we were hoping it was going to be. And they had no coming back to us anyway. So it's good.
it's a really interesting perspective. Well, I noticed from your LinkedIn, which I have pulled up, that you're on the board of advisors of Catapult Partners. Of course, we have a mutual friend, Neil
Yep.
Waterman. who is one of the founders there. And then you spent some time as a board member of Texas Air Composites.
Mhm.
And so I know continue to be involved, pretty plugged in just by the nature of your business and then the nature of your personality, and then being in DFW for a long time. So continue to be involved and look at other opportunities and possibilities, although sticking with, your company you founded for sure and working on that and taking care of your clients. What took you to those two board positions, or what interested
Uh,
you?
you know, Henry, and you spent many years on the boards for entrepreneurs organizations like I did, and I don't, other than volunteer boards, I never really spent any time and really dealt, was able to dive in and really get your hands dirty on working boards and volunteer boards as well. It's getting around sitting at the round table with brilliant individuals, brilliant minds, very smart, very successful individuals. That's what gets my blood flowing, and I love winning. Okay, so don't get me wrong. I'm not putting that, hey, I just want to be a board member rather than, build and run a successful company. But I love winning in a successful company. And sometimes winning is revenue. Sometimes it's the company culture. Sometimes it's going to be the tenure that you have with the people that are working for you. So it comes in all shapes and sizes. But the other thing too, what I love doing is being able to pay it forward. And because of my relationship that I've established out there with many people, they've trusted me and they've come to me and they say, Chris, do you know anybody who can do this? And my response is, let me check. And as a matter of fact, I do. I love to put those people together because I've done that over and over and over again. And those people have gone on to be very, very successful, either acquiring company, A from B, or building a new company, or even just utilizing each other's services. So I always want to pay it forward because I'm a firm believer of whatever's going to go around is going to come back tenfold over the course of time. And so, but it's not, I'm not sitting here counting down the hours or, got a tick mark here on who owes me what. But when you help people out and they become successful for it, number one, most of the time, everybody remembers that. They want to call you back and they want to thank you for it. But they also want to be able to show you how appreciative they are. And they end up making introductions for me and my company. So that's great. So on the board levels, when you're sitting there and seeing exactly how some of these decisions are made, one of the fascinating things that I went through was back at Texas Air Components was when they were going through an acquisition, they were being acquired, and that was fascinating to learn the nuances of what's going on behind the scenes. And it was a very successful equity event for those guys that own that company. And then entrepreneurs organization, as you know this, you're meeting and hobnobbing with just brilliant minds. Some of them are just getting started in their career. Other ones are long in the tooth like you and I are. And you got all shapes and sizes in there too. And so it's just amazing just to continue learning. And so I'm a consummate learner, and I want to be able to continue helping people, paying it forward, winning, and at the same time learning new things with new technologies, new companies, and, being able to pass that on to those that are going to be beneficial to it.
So obviously, if there's anything you'd like to throw in, you've said an awful lot of good things, and I think people are going to be very interested to hear. But when you were a kid, or when you were first dating your wife, did you ever think you'd say, "Well, I'm going to run my company for 17 years"? Or was that even in your mind?
It was. It was. I see it a lot. My son now. My son just turned 21, and he is always, "Hey, I thought of a company, an idea for a new company." He sends it out there, and most of it's already been done. But he's not in the business world, so he doesn't get this exposure. But as a kid, I always was thinking about how do I build the better mousetrap? How can I improve something? How can I take an existing product and make it better? And so I worked at a very young age. Like when I was a kid, I literally, all through school for the most part, I had 4.0. And so even in addition to that, I played sports, okay, which was not there wasn't a lot of those combinations out there, especially in Southern California. But 4.0 student, actually, my GPA was actually higher than that because of, honors and AP and stuff. But in the mornings, I had a morning paper route. So I'm up at 5 o'clock, 6 days a week, putting the papers together, putting them in the bag, riding my bike, throwing papers, and then come back, get ready for school, do my schoolwork, then play whatever the sport was that was in season, and then come back and do my homework. And by that time, I didn't have much of a social life from middle school and then the first 2 years in high school because I was going to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock every single night because I had to get up at 5 o'clock the next morning. So that was created some really good habits, going into that. But it also the discipline, the commitment, because the other thing too is if I was just in a daze and didn't sleep well the night before, the individual that didn't get their paper that morning, especially back in the 80s, if you didn't get your paper the next morning, they were not very happy. And they were loud and they were angry when they couldn't read their Saturday or Sunday morning paper. So it didn't take a whole heck of a lot to get my happy backside out of bed and ready and going. And so that carried me through the rest of high school and then ultimately into my adulthood and building and running my own company.
I still get a hard copy of a newspaper, even though I get it online as well. But my dad, I remember he used to get three newspapers, and of course, there was the evening news, and there
Mhm.
were the newspapers. So if you didn't get your newspapers, hey, you were out of the news. Uh, and then I guess Ted Turner, CNN, 24-hour news, but
Yep.
that was the first time when you could get news, and then more stations, and then the internet, and obviously on and on and on. But yeah, paper out was pretty important.
Yep. And so that, when I moved back to the East Coast from the West Coast, I wasn't going to do a paper route. So I was in construction. I know you spent some time in construction, but my idea back then was to create a construction cleanup. So all the residential housing and stuff, on the East Coast, which was growing, not shrinking like it is today. But back then was to go to all of the in the neighborhoods. You had different builders building their own houses. Sometimes they were spec homes, sometimes they were custom, but they all needed construction cleanup. And back then you could, get a bulldozer, dig a big hole, throw all the scrap lumber in there, light a fire, and have a heck of a bonfire. And when it's done, it's all ashes. You cover it back up, and everything was just fine. So construction cleanup, laboring, fence posts, you name it. It was tough work, especially when it's 90 something degrees and 90 something percent humidity on the East Coast. You remember those days. You kept yourself in shape as well.
Right, right. Well, you've always been in shape. We could wrap up with your mountain climbing or endurance quests with your. Did you do it with your daughter and son? Uh,
I just my daughter when she graduated, she did undergrad, finished up in May 2022. And so she saw me train and get ready for these epic adventures that I had prior to that. Like back in 2018, I was over in Nepal for several weeks and went to Everest, climbed some of those peaks around there, which was a blast. And then we did it again. When I say we, me and a couple of other EO guys from San Antonio. We went down to Argentina, and we were down there for several weeks. And then we ended up climbing Aconcagua, which is the tallest peak outside the Himalayas. It's just under 23,000 feet. Henry, the funny thing about this was it was February 2020. And then when we came off that mountain, it was the first week in March 2020. We had no idea the pandemic had been taken off. And so there's 15 people in this expedition. Our bragging
well,
rights was
there wasn't up. You were safe at 20. You should have stayed up there, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly right. Should have stayed up there. And the fun part about that was you're off the grid, for weeks. There's no mobile coverage out in the mountains, especially when you're up, in 15, 20, 23,000 feet. It's crazy. But what was so sobering, if you will, was half of our expedition were from outside the US. And it took us hours to come down off that mountain, days to come off the mountain, but then hours to get back into Mendoza. And as soon as we got back into mobile coverage, everybody's phone lit up with emails, texts, missed calls, whatever, you name it. And so those individuals that were from outside the US and from Europe and Asia as well had already had family members pass away. And so it went from what is this flu everybody's talking about in January to coming down off the mountain the first week in March going, what just happened? And so we got back into the US March the 7th, back in the offices of March the 9th, if I'm not mistaken, and those stay-at-home orders came just a few days after that. So that was bragging rights down there. Thank God we got out of Argentina because I think other than Italy, Argentina fared the worst of most of the countries. But then, so that was fun. So you go over to Everest and you spend, several weeks over in Nepal, same thing down in Argentina. And then we were 3 weeks in Africa with my daughter doing Kilimanjaro, and that's what she wanted to do for her graduation from college. And so she saw the pictures, saw us train, saw what we look like, saw the benefits from it, and it was just. And I'll throw this out to you too, Henry. It's if people took what they were able to accomplish on a mountain and applied it to business. Let me tell you what I mean by that. They would be able to accomplish probably more so than they ever thought they could. Because there's something about, there's one thing about going to the gym, working out, keeping yourself looking good, feeling good, and healthy, but training for muscle build versus training to potentially save your own life or the lives of those around you takes a whole new meaning. Because at any given moment, when you're on the side of that mountain, you don't know if there's going to be an avalanche. You don't know if there's going to be a rock come down. You don't know what's going to happen. And someone slips and falls or whatever else. And you're put into a peril position that is not to be taken too lightly. So those are a lot of the things that, that I took from that. And especially when you're on the side of the mountain, you accomplish those things. You end up doing things that your body you didn't know you could do it. And then that head talk between the ears, no matter what video you watch or YouTube or training, nobody will ever talk to you about the head talk and what's going on. So when you're looking up at the peak and you're going, it's close enough, right? You start challenging yourself and doubting yourself and whether or not you can actually get up there. And so it's good stuff.
It's a good cap. Entrepreneurs, Business, and Finance just had our first mountain climber on, I believe.
hopefully there'll be more bragging rights to come. We just haven't been able to do anything in the last 2 years.
Well, hey, thanks so much for coming on. That was really terrific. And I look forward to getting together with our wives again soon and
Sure.
seeing you out and about. So
that sounds great. Henry, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. It always is. Love doing this. And so, God bless you and all the rest of the folks who are going to be watching this and, onward and upward.
There you go.